the 27th of June 2023, through our special education needs assessment for the ECC centers, we have 93 suspected cases of students presenting with different abilities and disabilities, and 31 students who are diagnosed currently. Also referring to that date, we have 10 of our students receiving intervention, various types of intervention, either from the special education services, 5, and 5 from speech and language therapy. The other interventions may or may not include social work services through home visits, guidance and not guidance and counseling services, but more occupational therapy and behavior therapy. And students who are receiving the interventions are students who have been referred to the Ministry of Education, Student Support Services Division.
Can I just intervene and ask something here, if I could? You mentioned the intervention strategies of the Student Support Services. The information that we've been told over and over is how strapped Student Support Services is in terms of even the primary and secondary school students in Trinidad and Tobago, and the increased load Student Support Services has encountered after the COVID-19 pandemic. You have identified 143 government centers, 600 plus private centers, 57 civil ETAL, and you are telling us that intervention services have been provided for 93 diagnosed, 31, 10, and 5, which is just over about 130, 140. And you provide technical support to teachers and parents. One of the things we encountered at a school in, is it Central or South, is that a parent was extremely frustrated to the point of tears, and a teacher frustrated to the point of tears because their child clearly had some sort of undiagnosed special need. And what the parent was going through was the ministry telling the parent, take the child to the doctor at the health center for intervention, and the doctor telling the parent, take the child back to the education ministry for intervention, and back and forth and back and forth. And the parent became so frustrated with that runaround while their child was languishing and not getting any intervention and not being actively engaged in the school. What are we to tell a parent like that when you tell us that there's intervention? And the numbers that you've identified in terms of intervention are not in alignment with what the global statistics indicate is the prevalence of children with disabilities and special needs at between 10 and 15% of the school population. So if we are to take that as the global benchmark, we are barely scratching the surface. And you could imagine dealing with a typically presenting child is hard enough at that age group. Imagine a parent trying to provide for their child in a situation where the teachers aren't trained and technical support is sporadic, because training a teacher in special needs intervention is an extensive process. Getting a parent acclimatized to what they're dealing with and also providing intervention that supports what's happening in the center is another intensive process. So what you have indicated to me doesn't seem adequate in any way, form, or fashion in dealing with the magnitude of the issue here.
The issue is a large one that we are coping with, and there is always need to increase the number of staffing we have to meet the needs of our students in Trinidad and Tobago, especially our special needs students. But there is a process, and the government ECC centers normally follow that process. And it moves from, it's a 9-step process, and I'm going to refer to the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration, March 1st, 2023, page 10. And the referral process is there outlined as the 9 steps identified in the Ministry of Education's education pathway for students with special needs, where the teacher monitors, engages the parent. That is discussed with the parents and the professionals of the SBIT process. And if there is no improvement, then the approval form with supporting documentation then moves to the Student Support Services Division of the MOE. This case is then assigned to either the school social worker, special education officer, or guidance officer as need of the recommendation, and then recommendations are implemented and the student is monitored over a period of time. If required, the student is then referred to what we call our Developmental Assessment Intervention Unit of SSSD, which houses our cadre of psychologists for further evaluation or referral, or to an external agency or service provider. Students who have been diagnosed then receive an individualized education plan, which is a developed recommendation of interventions that are then implemented by teachers and also guardians and parents. And students receive those targeted interventions, and the progress is monitored by the parents, teachers, and SSSD personnel. So that is the process for parents who have observed that the children are not reaching a different developmental stage. They can reach out and we move through that process with the children.
What you've identified there is a commendable extraction from any special education protocol around the world as best practice. The question is, do you have the resources to do that effectively, given the load that's presenting in Trinidad and Tobago? That is the question, not that you know what to do, but is it being done? Because an intervention for a child with special needs, depending on the diagnosis, needs constant attention and remediation from somebody who is trained.
Yes,
not the diagnosis, the individual educational, the IEP has to be administered on a daily basis by someone who is trained. And I'll give you an example of a government center we visited, giving you identification of the 9-point plan. The supervisor at that center, is it in Central Trinidad? Followed the 9-point plan, and over a year is awaiting any sign of a trained special needs teacher or any intervention for a 6-year-old boy who has a profound developmental issue, who is not receiving any intervention and is in the institution, a government institution, almost as a babysitting. They do the best they can with him. In some instances, they have learned on their own to feed him because he has some issues with swallowing, and they struggle to just keep him occupied in the day because they have not been able to get any intervention, or do they follow the 9-point plan? So what do you tell the parent of that child?